that. You're really kind, thank you. Anyway, let me see, yes, here I am. A number of years ago, I had the opportunity of working with a neuroscientist on the interaction between our perception and the experiences that we have. And effectively, the whole experience left me with one of the most powerful lessons that I've learned in my life. And that is that everything in life is meaningless. And I mean that in a very literal way. I mean, everything we touch, everything we smell, everything we hear, everything we taste, in its own has no meaning. The words that I'm speaking right now are just sounds that are coming out of my body, which have no meaning until the moment they reach your brain. And at that moment, your brain goes like, oh, I recognize this sound. And I'm going to connect it to stories that I already know. And those stories give the sound meaning. So if I say the word dog, in a millisecond, you're all thinking of a dog. But what's really interesting to me is that some of you will be thinking of cute little puppies. And others of you may be thinking of mean, bad dogs. And that's been determined by the experiences you've had in the past with the word or the concept of dog. And to me this is really fascinating because if you think about it, the stories we tell ourselves determine the experiences that we have, but the experiences that we've had determine the stories that we tell ourselves. And it's like a perpetual circle. And for my profession, because I work in customer experience, which is all about how do you influence perception, how do you influence stories through experience, I've always thought that fascinating, which is why I thought I'd bring along 3 lessons that I've kind of learned over the years, which I apply in my practice, and which might be of use to you as well. Some of you may know. If so, then apply them even more. If not, then I hope they're useful. And those 3 stories are basically stories can make the ordinary special. The second lesson is that stories can help remember an experience and retell an experience. And the third one is that stories can basically expand our perception of what is possible. And I'll start with the first one, which is that stories can make the ordinary special. And for that, I'd like to take you back to the 4th of October, 2019. I was walking in Cecil Court, which is a very small street in London. For the connoisseurs, it's the little alley that was the inspiration for Diagon Alley in Harry Potter. Yeah, so this is the real place. And basically I was going there because I was going to have a course on tarot. Yeah, how to read the tarot. But it wasn't a regular course. It wasn't about, predicting life and things. That was part of it. But there were some clinical psychologists there, so there were some narrative designers there were a whole bunch of people there, which we really dove deep in all the nerdy stuff. Like, all the archetypes and how people project their own ideas on the cards and all that stuff. And it was all very interesting. But the most important lesson I took away from that session didn't have anything to do with the cards. It actually came when this bowl came to the table. Because this was a bowl with all sorts of little trinkets in it, and our trainer basically invited us to select the most valuable item in this bowl. And we all picked one, and this was a picture which was left afterwards. And he asked us, why did you take this? And, well done, everybody. And he said, but there's one thing I need to say, and that's nobody picked the item of most value. Because he said, the item with most value, and he actually pointed towards this ring, and you cannot really see it that well on the picture, but it was one of those really cheap plastic rings. Yeah? I mean, there's no way you could consider that thing valuable. However, for him, it was the most valuable thing, because it was the ring that his father had slipped around the finger of his mother during their wedding. Because what had happened was, because of all the stress that was going on, his father was unable to find the rings. And the only thing he could think of was to go to one of those bubblegum machines, to put in money and then just keep turning, because not everything is a ring, until he had 2 rings. they used those rings to get married. Then afterwards they found the rings and everything was okay again, etc. But this ring actually became a family heirloom. Now the lesson in this was, and this was actually his real point, is that a couple of moments ago this ring was meaningless for all of us. But suddenly, by adding a little story to it, it even acquired value for us. We weren't at the wedding, we didn't know his mother, we didn't know his father, but the value of a plastic ring increased simply by adding a story. And that's basically the first suggestion I'd like to leave you with, is that when you go out, when you work on your experiences, I'm sure you're doing a lot of work with stories. You're working with actors, you're working with interactions, with game designs, whatever it is that you do. But also have a look at all the items, at all the props, at everything around, all the physical stuff. And if you can find ways to add credible and authentic stories, because it was a true story, if you can add authentic stories, what you do is you add to the value of the item and of the experience that you're delivering. That was my first suggestion. Secondly, is that stories make it easier to talk about experiences. And this first really hit home with me when I was working for Bordeaux Wines, Region Bordeaux. And effectively they had great experiences. I mean, Bordeaux is a nice experience in every sense of the way. They only had one problem. That was that while people were really excited about their experiences, afterwards, they didn't really talk about them that much. It was like, yeah, we had a great time. Yeah, the wine was good. But then the conversation kind of ended. And when we started deep diving into that, we actually found that during these experiences, which were amazing, they were only told 3 stories. And this was over 113 chateaux. And those 3 stories were all about terroir, histoire, et méthode de vinification. This was 95% of the stories. Yeah. Now, if I've had a great experience, and I come to dinner with you, and you say, how was it? Am I going to talk about the minerals in the soil? Am I going to talk about the méthode de vinification? Yeah. I mean, it's interesting for some people, no debate, but for most of us, we don't really talk about these things. So this is why the conversation usually fell flat, because it wasn't interesting. It didn't make the conversation interesting, so the word of mouth just didn't happen. And what we discovered is that to change this, what we actually needed to do was create a story world of authentic stories around Bordeaux, which made it interesting conversation. So we started with the French Revolution, with Johnny Depp, with the fact that according to the University of Firenze it was, women who prefer red wine have a higher sex drive. I don't know if it's true, but the university said it. And my absolute favorite is that the original recipe for Coca-Cola was Bordeaux laced with cocaine. This is a true story. Effectively, Mr. Pemberton traveled to Corsica, where this seemed to be a favorite drink at the time, and basically took that recipe home. Then with the whole prohibition, he had to stop with the alcohol. But effectively, that was now you can go home and all know that Coca-Cola was a French invention, in case you ever worried. But my point is, and this is actually my second suggestion, is that when you work on your experiences, don't just work on making people feel good. Also, make sure that they have stories that make their conversations more interesting when they get home, when they talk to their friends. That's A, going to help them relive the experience themselves, which is cool, but also commercially, because at the end of the day, this is also about making money. It generates positive word of mouth. But you have to help them, you have to give them these stories, because otherwise they won't come. Which gets me to my final point, and that is that stories are also an opportunity to kind of expand our perception of what is possible. And this, I admit this is a little bit of an idealistic point of mine, so this is not as commercial. But if you look at society today, I mean, there's a lot of negativity going around, and a lot of it is coming from media, a lot of it is coming out of Hollywood, the news that pit us against each other. Hollywood's full of stereotypes. I mean, all of these things which really disempower, which make us powerless in a way. But what I found is that as experienced creators, we have an amazing opportunity to change that conversation. And effectively, I was really confronted with this on two projects that I had the privilege of working on. The first was one where we reinvented work. Yeah, where we basically said, can work be fun? You know, can we create work as an immersive experience where instead of people saying, thank God it's Friday, I don't need to work anymore, that they go like, thank God it's Monday, I can go to work again. Yeah, and it took some effort, but we actually got there. And the second one was when we reimagined funerals, where we couldn't really get people excited to go to funerals. But the idea of taking funerals from a sad event to a magical moment where people were able to move on, where people were able to kind of remember in the right way, was quite possible. And the interesting thing for me was that even when we just showed these two elements on storyboards, yeah, forget about the actual experience, the people we showed it to started thinking differently. They started seeing opportunities. Oh, well, work can be fun because we need to change this and this and this. And with the funerals, there are people who started taking initiatives to actually start changing the way that they looked at funerals of their loved ones and their own. Yeah, because they were planning in the future. And simply by the mere fact of introducing a new experience, a new way of thinking, you can actually change reality. Which is kind of like my final request, suggestion to you, is that when you're working on your experience, whether they are to entertain, to educate, to inform, you know, also take a moment to think about what are the small changes that I can contribute to the conversation. How can I plant seeds in people's heads, which, as Miguel was saying, after time, can trigger a transformation, simply because you can. I mean, there's probably no commercial value in it, but, you know, making life more beautiful is nice as well. Which leads me to the end of my conversation. And 3 questions I would like you to ponder when you go out in the world again. The first one is, how can you infuse everything with a story? The second one is, how can you give your audiences, your customers, stories that they can tell to others? And the third one is, how can you use experiences to create stories that change our perception of what is possible? And I realized that was a lot of information in a very short time. And, you know, that maybe, you know, go like, oh, do I need to do all of these things? Well, there's some good news. And I won't leave you with that one. And that is that there are magical rings that can help you. And just like the ring in the beginning, they look like very cheap plastic rings. But if you think about them, they're very real, by the way. They look real. They've got real magic in them. They've got 3 magical powers. The first magical power is that when you hold the ring, they remind you that everything can be imbued with a story, even a silly little ring. The second is that if you show them to others, they're actually a storytelling device, which you can use to talk about whatever experiences you have, even the ones you had here today at the Journée Immersive. And the third one is, you can hold them close to your heart. They're a reminder that you can change reality through the experiences you create. And as I said, these rings are real, and I'd like to leave you with them. So in a moment, you can have a look under your chair, because there's a little ring to remind you of these 3 things all the way through. Thank you very much.